on the first topic, I would be dealing more on the nutritional aspect of optimizing the gut and maximizing its functionality. So to begin with, here would be the points of discussion for today. So I'll introduce first several production aspects, and then what is nutrition of the gut or nutrition of the living gut, and then what factors affect gut health. So these are more of the physiological, environmental health challenges, management, and lastly, we will focus on feed anti-nutritional factors. And then as we focus on ANFs and what is the direct influence of these ANFs on gut health. So we'll be dealing more with the NSPs, the beta-conglycinin and the TIA of major feed ingredients, particularly of soybean, and then on fats and oils. And then we'll briefly delve into dysbiosis and its effect on animals. And then what are the solutions that we have right now to mitigate these anti-nutritional effects. And lastly, we'll conclude and takeaway messages will be given. Okay, so as a brief introduction, our poultry production business has been developing very fast. And nowadays, we would hear a lot of these genetic improvements. And then along with these genetic improvements, we are focusing more on the economically important traits. So what are those? For broilers, of course, we want them to eat and to consume a lot of feeds because that would drive faster growth rate. And of course, we want to have a better feed efficiency. And as much as possible, we want to keep them alive. But then we are always, there's always this threat of diseases. So the problem with, let's say, fast growth rate, there would be a lot of challenges, especially on metabolic related diseases. And then for layers, we want them to lay more eggs, but they should be eating less to have this low or efficient feed conversion. And we want the layers to be have good persistency. That means the laying rate or the production period of the layers would be extended in such a way that the peak production and the high production rate will last for a long time. So that is everyone's goal for their layers or for laying hens. And then we want to maintain at least longevity and livability. The longer we can keep these layers or these hens, the longer we can get eggs from them, of course, and the more profitable business we can have. And of course, we also focus on eggshell quality. So with these animal production systems, we consider a lot of factors: genetics, nutrition, health, environment management. And all these factors should play well with each other. There's no single factor that we should identify and improve on. So everything must go or must come along well. So at this moment, when we have this progress in genetics, in terms of technology, and some innovations in nutrition, also in environment or health aspects of the animals, why do we still see suboptimal performance, particularly in, let's say, in broilers or in laying hens? And we can see that, of course, on the when we see if our business are still profitable or not, and there's this economic impact of underperformance. So that is why a lot of researches and a lot of technologies are driven towards improving gut functionality, because as the previous speaker has mentioned, there's still a lot of things that we don't know about the gut. And the thing that we knew some 10, 20 years ago are not the same thing that that are existing now. So what really keeps a good what really keeps a gut functional, what keeps it healthy, and how to maintain it. So there are a lot of technologies, product solutions in the market, and as as a nutritionist, in the past, I don't really spend too much time on this type of products I should use to improve gut health. But nowadays, when I do formulations, I always consider would this be good for the gut of the chickens I am formulating for, something like that. So when we relate gut health and nutrition, we ask this question: how these feed components are transformed from intake to elimination, and that would be answered, of course, by the functionality of the gut. So the rate at which these proteins will be converted into amino acids and these carbohydrates into simplest form, such as glucose, and the fats to be transformed into energy. The gut should be functional, the gut should be healthy, and all these macronutrients, the transformation to their simplest form would depend on the status of gut health. Okay. So what are the factors which affects gut microbiome, the development of this gut microbiome? The breed of the animal, the age, sex, maternal factor, the region in the gut, the feed and its components, of course. It is affected by housing, hygiene, health program, and of course by the environment. And if we look at these factors which stresses the gut, as we would like the gut to have to be more resilient, as much as we would like to have a good balance of microflora in the gut, we cannot avoid some factors, particularly these environmental factors. Let's say in countries where it is summer, like here in the Philippines, usually we only have 2 seasons. We only have the rainy season and the summer season. So at times when there is high temperature, or the temperature would reach up to 40 degrees centigrade, we always suffer from this heat stress, and that really affects the balance of the microbiota. So not only, of course, the temperature as well as the humidity. And then management is one of the stressors of the gut. Let's say we have high ammonia level in the farm or in the house, and it affects air quality as well as the quality of the litter. And then normally when say birds or broilers have fast growth rate, especially with the breeds that we have now, they have faster growth rate. And then when layers have high egg production rate, or when they're at peak production, it's one of the stressors or one of the physiological stressors of the gut. So there we would see a lot of changes in the microbiome, the composition, of course, and the balance of the pathogenic and good microorganisms. Social stress, this would usually happen in pens or in cages when they have this hierarchy system in let's say in cages. Usually birds would suffer from this social stress. And then the health status. So vaccination, when we are vaccinating our birds, it's also a form of stress for them. Presence of diseases, coccidia, parasites, virus, bacteria, these are all stressors for the gut. And on the feeds, or from the feeds, we have anti-nutritional factors. So we would deal more on the anti-nutritional factors later. And then presence of imbalanced nutrients in the feed, particle size, forms, mycotoxins, and feed contaminants. So when we talk about anti-nutritional factors, we are talking about these ingredients in the feed or feed ingredients that prevents or alters the digestion and absorption of nutrients in the gut. So they can influence feed intake, and usually they would reduce the feed intake, and of course consequently impacts the performance of the animals. So some of these anti-nutritional factors are the non-starch polysaccharides. So it is usually of cellulose, hemicellulose origin, pectins, those NSPs that we see or we find in cereals and grains and legumes that we use in our feed ingredients. Galacto-oligosaccharides, particularly the stachyose, raffinose, and verbascose, they are mostly found in soybean. Mycotoxins, everywhere in the world, mycotoxins exist. And nowadays, a lot of our feed ingredients, even those that we don't expect to have mycotoxins, already have these mycotoxins. And a lot of, we know a lot of companies are investing on this detection and quantification of mycotoxins. And of course, possible solutions on mitigating the effects of mycotoxins. Glycoproteins, the most prominent one is beta-glycinin, and it is mostly found in soybeans. Phenolic compounds, tannins, we're not dealing with a lot of tannins, but a lot of alternative ingredients would have this high content of tannins, which affects performance of the animal. So histamine, or generally classified as biogenic amines, they are mostly found in animal proteins like the fish meal. Cyanogen, so if you're familiar with cassava or cassava root, cassava meal, cassava chips, they usually have high levels of hydrocyanic acid or cyanogen, which reduces feed intake of the animals. And then on protease inhibitors, so trypsin inhibitors are present in soybean, in canola, in other legumes, and oilseed meals. Phytic acid, lectin, saponin, oxalates. So phytic acid occurs mostly in animal plant origin, and that's the reason why we're using phytase in the diets, because phytic acids are everywhere. Buffering capacity, this is the ability of a feed material or a raw material to buffer or to neutralize the acidity. So mostly these are the phosphates, milk products, minerals like limestone or monocalcium phosphates. They do reduce the acidity of the gut. So if we would relate the anti-nutritional factor to humans, so this is the dark side of a human. So imagine if you have this like good-looking guy, and the dark side of him is like we don't know what he has, or this is his bad version. So when we talk about non-starch polysaccharides, this is like a good illustration of what we are dealing with in our feed ingredients. So I guess in the previous presentations on enzymes, you have this has been discussed, but I'd like to just focus on how these NSPs, particularly those which are the main components, NSP main components of our raw materials. So if we use corn, soy, wheat, some byproducts like copra, rice bran, palm kernel, we would always have this part of hemicellulose, cellulose, and pectins. And among those NSPs that are predominant are the silans, siloglucans, beta-glucans, glucomanans. So where can we find them? Usually we find them in all the raw materials that we use in our feed formulations. So just to compare, using wheat and corn, the NSP content of wheat is entirely different from the NSP content of corn. So though they both have arabinosylans, but the level or the percentage of the soluble and insoluble arabinosylans would differ in wheat and corn. So let's say wheat would have around 11.4% total NSPs, while corn has 8.1. But look at the soluble and insoluble component. Wheat has 2.4% soluble out of that 11.4 total NSPs, while corn has around 0.1. So the difference is really big, and this would normally cause an impact on gut viscosity. So compared to 20% versus 1.2% soluble NSP of wheat versus corn. So the effect on gut viscosity is usually seen as an effect or as a consequence of this enteritis or enterite. The consequence of gut viscosity is more on enteritis, so particularly bacterial enteritis, and that really affects gut health. So we could see here that, as I've mentioned, most of the raw materials that we are using in the diets contain high NSP levels. So the wheat, corn, barley that we use, and these oilseed meals like soybean and canola, these are the major ingredients that we use. And we can see here that for wheat, barley, and corn, they have high levels of insoluble silans as well as soluble silans, and some insoluble, or some in the case of barley, it has high level of beta glucans. So we have seen in the previous figure that wheat as well as barley, of course, have high levels of soluble NSPs as compared with corn. And then these soluble NSPs would cause gut viscosity and eventually would cause bacterial enteritis. And in the case of soybean and canola meal, these are the main protein or amino acid sources for our feeds, both for swine and poultry and for other species. And we can see here that the predominant NSPs are pectins, which are the insoluble and soluble pectins, as well as it also contains high levels of soluble silans. So we can see that all types of raw materials would have NSPs, and as mentioned before, we have to check on or characterize our raw materials so as to know their non-starch polysaccharide profile, and in that way we will know what type of enzyme or which particular enzyme are we going to use in our raw materials. So just going back to a review on this plant carbohydrates or NSP components, I just like to point here that these NSPs, they could be further characterized as soluble NSP or insoluble NSP. Are they fermentable? Are they non-fermentable? Because that would that characterization or that profiling of ingredients would help us to identify what particular enzyme should I use to help maintain a good gut health. So how about for soybeans? Soybeans has a lot of anti-nutritional factors, and of course we are using high levels of soybean in the diet, as it is still the cheapest amino acid source for our birds, for our animals. But soybean contains high levels of galacto-oligosaccharides, and these galacto-oligosaccharides are identified as raffinose, stachyose, verbascose. So these galacto-oligosaccharides, they attract water and they cause digestive viscosity. Soybean also contains high levels of this antigenic beta-conglycinin. This beta-conglycinin is part of that protein molecules in soybean. It is usually defensive or defense mechanism of soybean when they are still in the field. So they have high levels of beta-conglycinin to keep away those pests or those birds eating soybeans in the field. So soybean, it is always analyzed for trypsin inhibitor. Why? Because trypsin would bind pancreatic enzymes and it limits the potential for protein digestibility. And later we will have some illustrations on how these trypsin inhibitors would impair protein digestibility. So as much as possible, we would like to avoid having this undigested protein or high levels of proteins in the intestine, because this would result to proliferation of pathogenic bacteria. And what will happen if we have high levels of undigested protein in the intestine? They serve as substrate for these pathogenic bacteria. The more proteolytic bacteria you have, the more production of biogenic amines, ammonia, and other harmful substances that would impair gut health. So this is the effect of high trypsin inhibitor activity on broiler performance at 17 and 38 days. So we can see here that as we go higher with the trypsin inhibitor content of the feed, the tendency for the body weight is to be affected, negatively affected. So you can see the reduction in body weight at higher levels of trypsin inhibitor in the feed. And also, trypsin inhibitor affects protein digestibility and these lesion scores in chickens. So you can see here, as we go higher with the trypsin inhibitor content of the feed from 1.9 to 8.46, protein digestibility tended to decrease from 65% to 54%. And on the lesion scoring, this is necrotic enteritis lesion scores in the ileum. So with high levels of trypsin inhibitor in the feeds of the chickens, it causes high NE or necrotic enteritis lesion scores in the ileum. So we can see the deleterious effect of high levels of trypsin inhibitor on protein digestibility and gut health, which is represented by lesion scores, NE lesion scores in the ileum. So how about these soybean oligosaccharides? So typically, soybeans would have around 5 to 10% oligosaccharides. This is not a usual method, laboratory method that we employ when we are purchasing soybean. Let's say we buy soybean and we only analyze for crude protein, digestibility, or sometimes we analyze for the proximate analysis, but it's not very usual that we analyze for oligosaccharide contents. So there are particular laboratories which can analyze these oligosaccharides or the beta-conglycinin, but they're specialized ones. So these galacto-oligosaccharides, they cannot be digested by poultry because poultry in general lacks this alpha-1,6 galactosidase enzyme. So That's why I think there was a question before on the use of galactosidase. So if you have soybean in the diet, the more substrate you have for the galactosidase enzymes. That's why there's a need for galactosidase, alpha galactosidase supplementation on enzyme or soybean containing diets. So these oligosaccharides pass through the small intestine undigested. And what we know about the undigested feed or protein, so it slows down the feed passage rate and increases luminal fluid retention, and eventually would encourage growth of these pathogenic microorganisms. And that would affect the gut health balance, particularly the microbiota, the balance of the pathogenic and beneficial microorganisms. So this undigested feed or proteins, oligosaccharides as well, they will cause imbalance of microbiota. So how about this stachyose? Stachyose is one of those oligosaccharides that we find in soybean meal. So the higher stachyose levels that they have detected in the feed, the lower is the body weight gain of broilers. So we can see the effect of high stachyose levels on broiler performance. So again, with these oligosaccharides, we really do not analyze, or we don't really determine it in our feed or in our soybeans from our laboratories. But the more we know about the effect of high levels of these galacto-oligosaccharides, the more we can prepare, the more we can assess how we can manage gut health. So on beta-conglycinin, so soybean contains high levels of this beta-conglycinin. So this is a major storage protein in soybean, and its major effect is on the stabilization of integrity of epithelial cells, and it promotes inflammation. As we know, beta-conglycinin, particularly in piglets, they cause allergic reactions. They are the ones which causes this poor performance because of allergic reactions. And it shows that supplementing beta-conglycinin to either culture medium or in pigs increases the expression of this stress and inflammation related proteins. That means it really is a concern, particularly on inflammation of epithelial cells. So this is, although this is in piglets, this could be true also for broilers and for the chicks, particularly of young poultry. We can see here the effect of beta-conglycinin on the villi. So we can see there is a disrupted cell community when the piglets were fed with soybean. So when we say soybean, we are referring to the soybean meal that we feed to the diet. And the difference with the processed soybean, so later I will show like what we mean by processed soybean. So with the processed soybean, the anti-nutritional factors were removed, particularly the galacto-oligosaccharides, the beta-conglycinin, and the trypsin inhibitor were reduced to a safe level in such a way that it will not cause this destruction of intestinal lining. So beta-conglycinin has been proven as a strong antigen, and it causes reduction in performance. And we can see here that at certain levels, they would cause this particularly in piglets, but in chicks at certain levels, although we are feeding high levels of soybean in the diet, we don't know how much of that, let's say we incorporate 30 to 35% soybean meal. We don't exactly know how much is the beta-glycine content in such a way that we can determine, let's say, the protein content of the diet. We cannot determine the beta-glycine content of the diet. And let's say in rats at 5 milligrams per day, it can induce allergic response. So this might not be a concern for, let's say, older animals, but the concern here is more on the chicks, as they are very prone to allergic response or allergic reactions. So it shows here that elevated daily intake of beta-glycine may result to incomparable immune response that will impact live performance. So now we can deal with fats and oils and the importance of its quality. So when we use a lot of types of oil, so like in most tropical countries, we use cocoa oil, palm or palm olein oil, soybean, tallow, lard. We even use that restaurant leftovers, or how did they call it, used cooking oil. Those from restaurants and from fast food chains, when they have used that oil, we sometimes utilize that for our feed. So the usual quality control that we use, that we employ for fats and oils, we check for their color, appearance, taste, moisture, and free fatty acid peroxide value, iodine value, saponification value. So what are all these quality control measures tell us? At least FFA and peroxide value would tell us how oxidized our source of oil is, or do we have high levels of oxidation ongoing into that particular oil source. So when we are using a lot of polyunsaturated fatty acids, let's say we're using high levels of soybean oil, we're dealing with high levels of polyunsaturated fatty acids, and when we're using, let's say, used cooking oil or oxidized cocoa oil, we are taking a lot of risk, because this oxidative and hydrolytic rancidity, when oils are oxidized, it becomes rancid, they produce free radicals, and this will cause oxidative stress. So the oxidative stress that we try to avoid may come or may originate from using poor quality fats and oils. So these are one of the nutritional factors or nutritional considerations that we can check on, particularly those who are in feed milling, who can evaluate feed ingredients, not just the corn, soya, wheat, the cereals and grains, but also the quality of the fats and oils coming into the feed meal. Okay. So when we talk about fat oxidation, we're dealing more on the peroxidation and production of free radicals. So these free radicals, they are the one which creates damage to the cells. And as we know, there are two types of rancidity, the oxidative rancidity and hydrolytic rancidity. So mostly when high moisture of when oils have high moisture, it would lead to hydrolytic rancidity, and that's when we see high levels of FFA or free fatty acids. The one that we usually ask for suppliers of fats and oils to be analyzed in their fat sources or oil sources. So this rancidity or this oxidation would result to production of these hydroperoxides, and these are the ones which damages and causes oxidative stress. So when there's oxidative stress, it disrupts balance of gut microbiome, which will later compromise the immune system. So some studies on animals, fats with peroxide value greater than 100 milliequivalent per kilogram may affect performance, and the toxic secondary products will affect the immune function. So in birds, it has been shown that transit fats would result to low fertility and hatchability of the breeders, and this is also a very important factor when we talk about breeders or breeding animals. And in the presence of rancid fat in the intestine, it increases the number of intestinal E. coli. So it tends to drive the balance towards the negative side, such as increasing level of this E. coli. So those which are stressing the gut or offending the gut that are feed related, those that we can check on the feed and on our feed production systems. So they are the anti-nutritional factors. We discussed that already. Mostly are non-starch polysaccharides, high protein diets. So we have learned that high protein diets, if we have high levels of undigested protein, they would disrupt the microbiota, the microbiome, and would lead to production of these biogenic amines, which will disrupt the balance in the gut and would damage the gut. So this is also one of the practical factors that we can check in our feed production systems. We sometimes overestimate nutrients with the matrix values that we have for enzymes, for emulsifiers, and that creates nutrient imbalance. So when we have nutrient imbalance, let's say we have very high levels of proteins and then low levels of energy or low carbohydrates. So when there's always imbalance in the nutrients, it will predisposes the animals, the birds, to having gut health issues. So later I will show how this nutrient imbalance, particularly the oversupply of nutrients, would cause dysbiosis. So the sudden change in ingredients. So this happens most of the time when let's say we have to change the cereal or the grains that we have in the diet. For example, when we run out of corn, we will immediately replace that with wheat. And what happens, as we have shown before in that figure, the NSP composition of wheat is different from the NSP composition of the corn. And when we are not using enzyme in corn, while we are using enzyme in wheat, and then when we suddenly shift from corn to wheat without using any enzyme, then that would lead to more gut viscosity problems and eventually on problems on bacterial enteritis and other gut health related issues. So also important to note here is that mycotoxins, as we mentioned, they are present everywhere, but detection and selection seem to be we're still at that stage when we have some choices, but we don't know which one are the best ones. For example, on the detection method, do the ELISA determination by ELISA test kits are precise, or would they really tell you how much or what is the level of mycotoxicosis going on into this particular farm? Or when you're given with particular ingredients, can you really determine how much of zearalenone or T2 or aflatoxin is there? So when we talk about these feed ingredients and additives, so I am talking about mycotoxin binders. We have a lot of mycotoxin binders in the market, and they could be binders, some are enzymes, some are how do you call this, biopolymers, and some would be phytogenics, or some are processed minerals. So we have a lot of choices. So it's up to us which ones would work best in our flock or in our animals. So aside from these factors, there are also other feed contaminants. Although this is not particularly feed related, but coccidiosis, this is one of the important factors that we must consider when we are trying to maintain good gut health. Sometimes detection is we overlook at the detection or determination if what are the status of coccidiosis in our flock. And when we know we have a problem, then we know how to prevent it, of course. And in some countries, particularly in Asia, we're still allowed to use all types of the chemicals, the ionophores. We can also do vaccination with coccidiosis, but in some countries or in some regions, they are already regulating the use of these chemicals and ionophores. So this particular article has caught my attention because this study focused on the effect of coccidiosis on nutrient digestibility. So actually this is like a two-part study. One is on effect of coccidiosis on amino acid digestibility, and the other is on effect on fat digestibility. So the most notable impact of coccidiosis here was seen on digestibility for lipids. And this study shows that even if you add soy oil, which is a high quality oil source, when they added soy oil in the diet, it did not compensate for the reduction in lipid digestibility. And in fact, it causes detrimental effects to the FCR of the birds. So when birds are suffering from coccidiosis, we can relate that to the destruction or damages in the gut. And when that happens, it causes poor digestion of the nutrients. And why does it affect digestibility of lipids? So they still trying to figure out like what particular mode of action does the digestibility of lipid be affected by these damages in the gut. And then what they recommend here is that, of course, we would want to fulfill the energy requirements of the birds. So feeding highly digestible carbohydrates would support the energy intake and would provide the energy to the birds, especially when lipid utilization is compromised. So when coccidiosis is present, or at when the flock is at high risk for coccidiosis, we can do something at least to provide energy to the birds. So this is, in summary, what happens when we have the feed as instigator for this dysbiosis, or this vicious cycle of dysbiosis. So feed would usually have these anti-nutritional factors, They also have these mycotoxins. Sometimes feeds would cause this poor absorption and digestion of nutrients. Poor digestion of feed and absorption of nutrients. So aside from feed factors, there are also other factors that say mycotoxins or viruses, the environmental factors such as stress or presence of other diseases. When animals suffer from these factors, so this poor digestion and absorption of nutrients would lead to oversupply of nutrients in the gut lumen. And then when there's anti-nutritional factors which could favor the growth of these pathogenic microorganisms, and then that would lead to reduction in beneficial microorganisms in the gut. So there's already shift in microbiota, and that would also lead to inflammation and oxidative stress caused by this interference of microbiota with the mucosa. And then that would eventually lead to morphological and functional alterations in the gut. So sometimes you would hear of these terms, leaky gut, or the disruption of the tight junction. And then we would have this less functional gut. And then when we have this less functional gut, that means the gut is already impaired, or its functionality is compromised. So again, it would go on and on in this cycle. When you have less functional gut, that would also lead to poor digestion of feed and absorption of nutrients. So the cycle will go on and on and on. So the earlier we can control this dysbiosis to happen, like controlling it in the feed level, so the better we can manage our gut health. So we have plenty of solutions to optimize gut health. And when we say optimization of gut health, these are not just the products that we use, or the alternative solutions, or the antibiotics, or the feed additives that are being offered to us. So I'd like to relate the gut management to this with story. So of course, when we have like a rice field, in most Asian countries, we have a lot of rice fields. Like here in the Philippines, we have a lot of rice fields as we produce a lot of rice. So in the rice field, we want, so I would equate the rice field as the gut microbiome. So any living organism would have this gut microbiome. So microbiome is present in all living things. So in the rice field, of course, we want to be profitable. We want to grow more rice, the rice grains that we would harvest and would sell as rice, or we call it palay. And then so I would think that the rice grains would be the beneficial organisms, because we want these rice grains to proliferate. We want these rice grains to occupy the maximum area in our rice field. But then we cannot avoid having this weed. For example, rice in rice fields, we have this crop, or not crop, this weed called Echinoclea cruzgali. So they look like, actually they look like rice grains, but they grow in rice fields, and I represent it as the pathogenic organism. So our goal is to grow these beneficial microorganisms, the rice, and suppress the growth of these pathogenic organisms, or the weed. So for us to be profitable, we are not selling this weed. We are going to sell this rice, or the Oryza sativa. So gut health management is same as weed management. in weed management, we have a lot of solutions. We have integrated weed management. We do a lot of methods to grow or to manage the weed in our fields or in our crop fields. So it is the same as gut health management, that we have several factors to consider. For example, we consider feed formulation, the contents of the feed. We make sure that coccidiosis is under control. We have mycotoxin mitigations, biosecurity in the farm. We also consider water hygiene, feed hygiene, and of course, we consider a lot of products to improve digestibility of our feed and feed ingredients. So this weed management is almost similar or relatable to gut health management. So how do we control the weed? We can use scissors. We can use the big garden scissors. We can use herbicides. We can pull out the weeds, or we can just do nothing and talk to the weed or yell at them. But we have a lot of solutions to control the weeds. This is the same as what we do with the gut or with the gut health management. So our immediate action when we have gut health issues, we tend to change the diet. So I think most of the nutritionists could relate to this. Like when we have issues on gut health, we try to change the diet, or sometimes we increase the diet density. So we add more oil, we increase the energy of the diet. And remember that when we use high levels of oil, and when there's an ongoing challenge of coccidiosis, it will it's a great risk for fat digestibility. And then sometimes we change the ingredients because we think that the ingredient we're using now is not helping, or the other ingredient would be better. So we can check on that. We use a lot of additives. Sometimes we use antibiotics when we have this, we see suboptimal performance. We use water-soluble medications. So there's a lot of challenges and solutions that we can check when we want to manage our gut health. So some of the dietary interventions to keep a healthy gut: we use highly digestible ingredients. So I will just run through this, and we will discuss more in detail and in the next session. So we use highly digestible ingredients. We check on the feed form or the texture to maximize functionality of the gizzard. So we also use some fibers, and we use a lot of enzymes, organic acids, short chain fatty acids, medium chain fatty acids, particularly the butyrates and the monolaurins. We have emulsifiers to improve lipid digestibility. We have polyphenols, osmoregulators. We use trace minerals, phytogenics or essential oils, yeast, marine peptides, dairy products, toxin binders, prebiotics, probiotics. So we have a lot of dietary interventions, and or we shall call it dietary feed additives or product solutions. So some of the non-additive interventions. So quality control is important, of course. Having the balanced diet, clean and sanitized water, feed and water, vaccination and healthcare program is also a consideration, housing conditions, and of course, biosecurity in the farm. And if we can improve on or help the animals to grow better with a good environment, and of course, management. So in conclusion, we must not offend the gut, and it is the biggest organ that should be nourished by the host. The impact of feeds to the welfare of the gut is undeniably great. So the gut, when we want to maintain the functionality of the gut, we have to consider the impact of the feeds and of course the feed ingredients that we are using in our feed formulations. And there's a multitude of products options in the market to establish a well-balanced and healthy gut. So each one of them should be properly evaluated. And there's also available tools, not just the products, but also technologies in the market that we can evaluate to maintain good gut health. And we should assess and address the problem so we can really manage a good gut health. And with that, veterinarians and nutritionists should always work hand in hand so as to manage our birds' gut health. And thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Miriam, for your wonderful talk, for your first talk, for the second talk today and your first talk. I'm sure people formulating poultry feed must have developed a greater insight to gut health after this presentation. Some of them must be having some questions. Please feel free to drop your questions in chat box, or you may simply unmute your microphone and put your questions. I can see there is a question in chat box from our Bharat Dai. I would like to help you. Does normal heat treatment like cooking at home can detoxify, that is removal of harmful amount of anti-nutritional factors, soybean seed or mustard rapeseed meal to some extent? Or what is the best time and temperature or pressure combination for the same if heat treatment is effective?
Okay, this would be more for the removal of anti-nutritional factors in soybeans. So I think with the soybeans, they process it at high temperature. I'm not sure of what degree centigrade are they using for soybean meals in the normal processing, but this high temperature would destroy the trypsin inhibitor, sorry. And that's why we also have to check if it is overcooked or not. With high temperature, you tend to overcook the protein or to deteriorate the protein. So when protein is damaged, the amino acids in soybean will not be available. So we should be careful with that. I don't think the normal heat treatment in cooking would destroy the anti-nutritional factors in soybeans. Pressure and the exact temperature, I'm not sure about that, like the figure.
Okay, thank you. If anybody is having questions in their mind regarding this talk, please feel free. Yeah, Dr. Praveen, you can unmute your microphone and put your question by voice.
Ma'am, there are several methods for assessing the overcooking of soya. So which one is more practical and sensitive, and which can be done easily?
Usually, let's say the American soybean, the US Soybean Council, they recommend the trypsin inhibitor TIA method, or the KOH. Sometimes you have this in the laboratory, the urease activity. This is quite practical and easy to be analyzed, the urease activity, because that would also give you an idea if it's overcooked or not. And recently, there's this technology already on reactive lysine. They can check some laboratories can check on the reactive lysine. So when it's 90%, I guess 90% or higher, that means that the soybean is not overcooked. So there's a lot of method, but the most practical one would be the KOH solubility, potassium hydroxide solubility, and TIA or trypsin inhibitor activity. And although not very reliable is the urease activity, because that is based on change in pH, and usually the level is 0 to 0.5, and that would give you an idea if it's overcooked or undercooked.
Is KOH method sensitive enough?
KOH method, it's generally accepted. The level is 75 to 88%. That's the recommendation within that
Ma'am,
range.
use of galactosidase, is it economically viable, and which substrate we should consider it adding?
When we use high levels of soybean, what is high level of soybean? So you can notice in broiler diets, sometimes you use more than 30% of soybean. Although in layer diets, not so much, 20 to 25% soybean. But high levels of soybean would mean you have high levels of galacto-oligosaccharides. The alpha-galactosidase, the enzyme preparations would help digest those galacto-oligosaccharides. So you can reduce the impact of those galacto-oligosaccharides in the diet. There is like a recommendation already on how much should be the maximum level of galacto-oligosaccharides in the diet. I have to check on that, because if soybean contains 5 to 10% galacto-oligosaccharides, and then when we, let's say 10%, and then when we use soybean at 30%, you already have 3 milligram per kilogram of galacto-oligosaccharides in the diet. And I think the maximum level of galacto-oligosaccharides should be like 1.6, around 1.5 to 1.6. So for us to maximize the digestibility of these galacto-oligosaccharides, we have to select the best alpha-galactosidase.
What about other oil cakes?
Oil cakes, like soybean oil cakes.
Other than that, like mustard, oil cake, and groundnut, do they have high levels of oligosaccharides?
You mean like palm kernel cakes or copra cakes?
Yeah, copra meal.
Yeah, they are more of galactomanans, sir. Dr. Praveen, they have high levels of galactomanans.
So will this enzyme useful in that case?
I would recommend a combination of alpha-galactosidase and manganese.
Okay. So how much extra release of nutrients is expected if we are already using a normal NSP enzyme like xylanase and a protease enzyme that we are already using? So supplementing it with this enzymes, is it going to be bringing much more energy or other nutrients?
Okay, that's a very good question. Dr. Praveen, when we are using several enzymes in the diet, we should be very careful, because as I've mentioned before, sometimes using these matrix values of the enzymes, we tend to overuse them or maximize each of the matrix values, and that would lead to imbalance in the diets. When we use xylanase, we have matrix values for energy. When we use other enzymes like protease, even phytase, they assign matrix values for energy. And when we do that, we are overestimating the energy of the diet in such a way that when we use each one of them, let's say I use energy matrix for the silanase, for the protease, for the phytase, for all the other enzymes that I have, like mannanase, alpha-galactosidase, and sometimes you have emulsifiers with energy matrix value. So where do you think all those energy would be extracted? So my recommendation for that is that when I use energy matrix for the enzyme, I'll just assign to just one, let's say the majority is silan, the majority of the substrate is silan or arabinosilans. So I'll just assign energy to my silanase. For other enzymes, I will just put it on top or over the top, or I will not assign energy value to that. For protease, I will just use the amino acids and crude protein. And then for phytase, I will just use the matrix value of the calcium and phosphorus. So that that strategy of mine. I just focus on the nutrients they are designed for, or focal nutrients approach.
But even if we are not considering the matrix value,
Mhm.
theoretically it will be more useful for gut health and otherwise growth aspect, isn't it?
Yes. If we don't use the matrix value, you can incorporate the enzymes, and then when you put it on top or add on an add-on basis, it will definitely be beneficial to the digestibility and eventually to the gut health of the birds.
Ma'am, in the non-AGP categories, which one is most promising, essential oil or probiotic?
That would be answered in the next presentation. But for now, I think we have a lot of choices. In my practice, the one I consistently see improvements or as alternative to AGPs would be more on enzymes. Thank you, Dr. Praveen.
Okay.